Hey, what's going on guys, Chris here, and for the past few days I've just been messing about on Battlefield 5, tweaking the settings, basically trying to find the best options, through trial and error, of course using a little bit of inspiration from the settings I've used from Battlefield games in the past. Some of the settings I've carried over from Battlefield 1, but because Battlefield 5's gunplay's changed quite a bit, and because there's some new mechanics and stuff, I've had to mix things up a bit to find something that suits, and after loads of hours of testing, I think I've found something that does, at least for me anyway. As most of you have probably gathered by now, I play on PS4, so all of these settings I'm going to be going over in this guide are suited for console and controllers, and this means that they're probably going to translate over to Xbox One quite well too. PC, maybe not so much. And do keep in mind that what works for me might not work for you. I generally like to play with some pretty high sensitivity options in most games, so if you're going to copy these settings, I'd suggest you do a bit of extra tweaking yourself afterwards to find what best suits you, as everyone's got their own preferences when it comes to best settings. So anyway, let's get started. I'm going to run over those video options first of all, which are all mainly tied to the visual stuff and how things look on the screen. Going down the list from the top, I've got my brightness set at 65%, which is a tad higher than average. I normally play in a dark room, so bumping up the brightness a bit might seem like a bit of a weird thing to do, but I tend to find that having everything slightly lighter does seem to help a tiny bit with visibility and being able to see enemies, particularly the ones in dark rooms or lying prone on the floor. This helped me out a bit in Battlefield 1, and it seems to be the same now, though I guess this one just really depends on your own preference. The field of view setting is basically where the camera sits that you'll be viewing from. If this is too low, the screen will look really zoomed in and your gun's probably going to look massive, but if it's too high, you'll have a wider viewing area, though you're going to have a bit of a fisheye effect that makes everything look curved around the edges of the screen. I've got the field of view set at 74, as I find this to be a nice middle ground, and this goes for the vehicle third person field of view too. ADS field of view, I've got that on. This basically makes the field of view the same when you aim down sights, as if you have this one turned off, you're going to zoom in a lot more when you aim down sights, which can be a bit off-putting. Some people might like this extra zoom, but I find that it can be a bit distracting when you need to get on target ASAP. As for motion blur, unless you want a blurry screen when you're moving around, I'd probably suggest turning this down to 0%, or at least a lower percentage than that base setting, as that's just going to make the screen a bit clearer as you play. ADS DOF effects is switched off, which basically means that the edges of your iron sights won't blur when you're aiming. Bit of a personal preference really, as this is supposed to replicate the depth of field effect in real life when you're focusing on a specific point, but I just find that the sights are easier to use seeing the whole thing in focus, and the custom colour settings option is also turned off too. Now last of all in this section is all the video effect settings like chromatic aberration, film grain, vignette and lens distortion. And these are all pretty fancy looking, but I normally like to switch these off, just so there isn't any extra elements getting in the way on the screen that might be distracting. Though I guess you could have these on if you want the game to look a bit more cinematic. So that's the video section done. Gonna swiftly move on to the audio settings and get that one out of the way quickly next. Not a hell of a lot to say here really. Master and music volumes are both set to 100% as standard. Output configuration set to surround, because I play with a surround sound setup, and the sound preset is set to speakers. Announcer language is set to English, because I speak English, surprise surprise, and the in-game announcer option is set to on, along with the VoIP and subtitle settings too. Anyway, on to the gameplay options, starting with the basic section. I've chosen to show the HUD as you'd probably assume. I'd definitely suggest doing this, as otherwise you're gonna have a pretty hard time playing the game with all the on-screen information hidden. The HUD motion is set to on, and the player created content is set to show too. As for the chat log, this is only going to pop up when it's active, as there's no point it being there otherwise, with the magnified chat setting turned off, as I can see it pretty clearly as it is. I've chosen to hide the inventory, as I don't really need it being there, as I'll just get used to knowing what gadget I've got assigned for what button. Though you might want to show this if you need a bit more information on what you've got equipped, just to jog your memory. Moving on to the crosshair options now, I've got the visibility set to 100%, just so I can see it nice and clear on the screen. Though I've also very slightly changed the colour, just to make it a little bit more yellow. This is just to help out with its visibility on some of the brighter maps like Narvik, where there's lots of snow, as a completely white crosshair is more likely to get lost against a lighter environment, making it harder to see. It's only a subtle change, but it's just enough to make a difference. I've also chosen to hide the kill log, as I don't normally look at it anyway, so there's not really much point of it being there. Might choose to show it again at a later date, but for now I'm pretty happy with it not being there to be honest. Though if I was going to show it, I'd have it to show the weapon's name, just to make it a bit easier to see who got killed by what. In the same section, but just a bit lower down, is the overlay shadow strength, which I've currently got at 40%. Seems like a decent value to have it at, though it's also something that I might bump up a tab more at a later date. I'd probably suggest not having this too low though if you've got your brightness turned up. As far as the hit indicator goes, the only thing I've really tweaked here is the headshot colour, which I've changed to a bluey green sort of colour, which looks pretty nice. No other reason than that though. I guess you could change these to whatever you want really. Keep it simple or just go crazy with your favourite colours. Though I'd definitely suggest picking different colours for the different indicators, just so you know exactly what they stand for when your bullets hit your target. But at the end of the day, these indicators are there to relay information, not to make your screen look like a colouring book. So it's usually best to pick colours that are going to be easy for you to determine, or even just keep them at their default colours. Taking a look at the minimap options next, I've got the zoom radius for flight at 250, vehicle at 90, and on foot at 70. And as for the minimap size, this has been bumped up to 125%, which basically makes it bigger and easier to see, as you could probably guess. And that's pretty much it for this category. All the ADS icon opacities are just kept at their default settings. So as far as the advanced options go, Soldier Auto Lean In and Auto Peek Over are both set to off, because I just find these settings to be a bit annoying. Having these on basically causes you to pop your head out from behind cover when you aim while standing near said cover. Though I guess some people might like this, but I'm not really a fan myself. Parachute Auto Deploy, Context Based Order Giving, and Plane Chased Camera Roll are all turned on. Aim Assist Auto Rotation is switched off, though I know for a fact that the majority of console players are gonna prefer having this on. I like to have it off so aiming feels a bit more natural, though I do prefer to leave the Aim Assist Slowdown on. It doesn't lock onto your target or anything, but it does slow down your iron sight sensitivity slightly in ADS when you hover over a target, so it's easier to make small adjustments when aiming at an enemy. Most people are going to have much better results with this one on. And last of all for this section, I've got the reload hint and hint system on show, though I might hide these at a later date. And the network performance graph and aim lead indicators are both hidden, because I just don't really need them. Moving over to the biggest section of the video now, which is all about those controls. Invert vertical look is set to on. Most of you guys are probably going to have this one turned off, but for some reason I've always inverted the Y-axis on the games I play. Basically means that up is down and down is up. Once again, a personal preference. Soldier aim sensitivity is set at 70%. I find this to be a pretty good setting for turning around and being able to keep on target whilst hip firing without overshooting. Though you might want to tone this down if you prefer lower sensitivity settings, as this might be a bit too high for some players. Just have a little bit of a play around and see what best suits you. You might even like it a bit higher. As for Soldier zoom aim sensitivity, I've got this one at 83%, which feels like a nice figure to use with the controller, as I can stay on target without having to worry about that recoil kicking my aim off too much. Soldier sprint is set to toggle. This just means that you don't have to hold down the left thumbstick to keep running. All you've got to do is tap it once, which feels a lot more natural and easier to do. Double tap forward to sprint is turned off, which is another thing that just feels more natural, plus it also means that there's less button presses to perform, making traversal less of an effort. As for these soldier weapon zoom and steady scope settings, these are both set to hold, as I'm just used to these settings from past Battlefield games. The vehicle settings in this section pretty much mirror what I've got from my infantry settings, just so everything feels right when transitioning to and from vehicles. Vehicle aim sensitivity is set to 70%, so the same as my soldier aim sensitivity. Probably best to keep these two at the same value. And vehicle weapon zoom is set to hold, a bit like how the soldier weapon zoom is set to hold too. And last of all, invert vertical flight is turned on, which just feels right for me. Though you might want to reverse this if it feels a bit weird. It might cause you to crash your plane and die, which wouldn't be very good. Now still in the control settings is the control scheme section, where I've done a bit of playing around with custom button mapping. You might want to just leave this section alone, but I find that certain actions work a lot better when changed to other buttons, so I'd definitely suggest changing a few things here if you want more control over your movements. Basically, to cut a long story short, I've swapped the crouch and melee buttons so that the right thumbstick lets you crouch when you tap it, and circle lets you melee, or B if you play it on Xbox. I've also switched around the triggers and bumpers so that L1 is used to aim instead of L2, and R1 is used to fire instead of R2, and this pretty much goes for all the vehicles too. I just find that the front bumpers are a bit more sensitive than the triggers at the back, and so they're easier to aim and fire with, though this might just be a thing I've carried over from the PS3 days. I tend to always swap these over whenever I get a chance. But anyway, moving on, we've got the advanced section next, and I'd highly suggest turning stick aiming acceleration right the way down to 0%, as it'll make aiming seem a bit more responsive like it was in Battlefield 4. As for the uniform soldier aiming, I've got this set on, and the coefficient is set to 178, which feels pretty nice if you prefer higher sensitivity options. This makes different zoom levels seem quite consistent with each other, though the standard 133% setting is also a pretty safe option, which a lot of players tend to prefer. So I'd probably suggest picking between these two percentages, as I've had pretty good results with them both in the past. Moving down the list, we're onto the vehicle aim relative controls, which I've turned off, like I did in Battlefield 1. And I've also decoupled aiming from turning 2, which basically means that you can look around independently without having to aim while you do. Another option I've carried over from Battlefield 1. Now, pretty much everything else in this section is left at default. It's probably best not messing around with the individual zoom sliders while you've got uniform soldier aiming turned on, as that's just going to cock everything up. So you're probably best just leaving the rest of this section as it is. So the last part of the control section, and well, the last part of the settings, is the controller tuning options, which is a pretty important section that's going to really impact your gameplay a lot once you tweak a few things. I've got the vibration option switched off, something I usually do when I'm playing competitive multiplayer, as it's just another thing that might be a distraction. Next up is the dead zone settings, which if you've seen my Battlefield 1 settings guide, you'll probably know that I like to turn the dead zone right the way down, as it's going to make the thumbstick seem a lot more responsive. Axial dead zones and max input threshold are left at their default settings, though when it comes to the center dead zones for both left and right sticks, 3 seems to be the magic number, which might seem a bit too low for a lot of players, but I honestly find that the lower values give you more control over your movements. This is still actually a little bit higher than I had it in Battlefield 1, where I literally turned the dead zone off to 0%, but because recoil plays a bigger role in Battlefield 5, having it too low can make the gun seem harder to handle. So having a little bit of dead zone is a good way to stop your aim floating around as you open fire, which will probably cause more shots to miss. I've also turned the L2 and R2 dead zones down to 1%, just so they respond a fraction of a second sooner when they're pressed. And the max input thresholds for both buttons are just left at 15%. Nice and simple. So that's pretty much it for my best Battlefield 5 settings. Remember folks, these settings might work for me, but they might not work for you. So just try them out and adjust them as you need to. I'll be using these settings from now on, but if I tweak them in the future and find some better options, then I'll either leave a comment in this video for you to see, or just make an updated video at a later date. Though I'm pretty happy with these options, so they're probably not going to change too much if they do. But anyway, thanks for watching guys. If the guide helped you out, a like will be appreciated, and make sure you subscribe to see loads more content on Battlefield 5 coming up in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in that next episode.